Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. The California Reparations Task Force shocked the world by declaring that they would only be limiting reparations to the descendants of American slaves and not extending it to all black immigrants who came here in the 20th century. This is crucial because reparations means absolutely nothing if you do not tie it to this country's original sin. Now, ABC, like the rest of the white media, began their propaganda offensive to attack reparations on the grounds that it's too narrowly defined. The issue of reparations has been around for 150 years plus. When was the last time or any time that the white media said anything positive about the issue? When have they said anything even remotely supporting or advocating for it? When have they said that reparations was anything other than controversial? And that it wouldn't be considered, much less happen. And yet now they're suddenly sympathetic to the issue. And as far as they're concerned, it's being defined too narrowly. Apparently, the white media feels reparations needs to apply to more people. Yeah, including any white person who tries to claim that their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpappy on their mother's side might have been on a plantation somewhere. We recognize that particular trick bag. So, as is the white media's practice, they try to give their propaganda an air of authority by claiming that experts agree with their headline. So you should swallow whatever pile of horse crap the white media is shoveling because some expert says so. First question, is it true that this person or persons is an expert? Well, it's true the white media says they are. But second question, what are they experts on? Botany, gender studies, intersectionalism, underwater basket weaving. See, the white media loves to take black actors and entertainers and put them on TV and talk about black people's issues with them. So when you hear them claim that some expert is saying this or that about our issues, the very first question you better ask is, what is this so-called expert an expert in? What makes them uniquely qualified to speak on this issue? Hell, what makes them more qualified than you or me? Because 90% of the time, the white media's so-called experts are just heads of nonprofit groups, usually paid for by white money, pundits on the payroll of white power who have no real credentials, experience, expertise, or even anything intelligent to say. But they will repeat the white media line, and apparently that's what qualifies you as an expert. Like in this low-key ABC hit piece, when we read the article, we see that the first expert is Lisa Holder, who was a member of the California Task Force on Reparations and apparently is a civil rights attorney. Her complaint is that reparations needs to be inclusive. Gee, were those plantations inclusive? Was the back of the bus inclusive? Were the lynchings inclusive? Get the hell out of here. The next expert shill that they bring up is somebody named Tony Burrows. He's supposed to be the founder and CEO of something called the Center for Black Genealogy. So they name drop a guy who we've never heard of, who's apparently supposed to be heading an organization we've never heard of. I don't know what they're about or who's paying them. Giving your group a pseudo-official sounding name means absolutely nothing. White supremacists do it all the time, particularly with their so-called think tanks. But this Burrows guy said he opposes using family lineage as the sole determinant of reparations. And why? He says oral history, as if family lineage is determined solely by whether you say your ancestry goes back to the plantations or not. Now, I'd like to know, who said that we should just take someone's word for it? Has anyone ever said that? So this is a false argument, a straw man. This Burrows clown is arguing against a position that nobody has taken. We're talking about providing documented proof. But Burrows is opposed even to that. And his argument against providing documented proof, he claims that many records of those enslaved are not readily available, as there is limited written history of enslaved people. Now this sounds just like all those white supremacists, doesn't it, who try to invent flimsy doubts about how a reparations program would work? Sounds just like them, doesn't it? So you have the people who claim to be for reparations, but they use the exact same pathetic talking points and cheap skepticism as any garden variety white supremacist you can think of. Did anyone tell the Japanese Americans that they didn't have the paperwork to get reparations? The biggest chaotic mess of documentation by far would be to determine a reparations scheme for Native Americans. There's practically no documentation on them. And then when you throw in all the $5 Indians, how in God's name do you decide anything on that? And yet Native American reparations has been the biggest and most well-funded reparations program the U.S. has ever had. Primarily because so many of those Native Americans have been white people whose ancestors paid to get them listed on the Dawes rolls. But notice that we don't see anyone saying Native Americans can't get reparations because there's no records of who was mistreated and how. Did they take the names of all the people who were forced on the Trail of Tears? Did they get the names of all the people who died from smallpox lace blankets? When the U.S. Army conducted its raids on Indian villages, did they get the names of the people they killed or drove into the wilderness? Now, right there is a situation where there's no records of anything. Oral tradition is the main thing relied upon with them, and yet nobody was saying a word about how that's not good enough, and neither is documentation. We have to include everyone. They certainly don't feel that all of those black Indians need to be included. They don't say that anyone who claims to be Native American at all ought to be getting something. No, they're a little bit more circumspect with that. So this Burroughs guy is simply opposed to any sort of reparations plan that doesn't include any black person who ever came to the United States at any point in time, even if you showed up just 5 seconds ago. He's opposed to it on general principle, though I bet you even he can't tell you what the principle is. Now, you would be thinking that these guys would actually be saying, well, you know what, maybe this reparations setup isn't perfect, but at least it's a start. At least it gets the ball rolling. And at the very least, it gives us a foundation to at least get some money moving, right? And you would be wrong, because then there was Camilla Moore, who happens to be another member of the Reparations Task Force in California, and she said direct cash payments is only one form, but then there's also restitution, and then satisfaction in the more symbolic forms of reparations, like a formal apology commemoration. This woman is an idiot. First of all, this woman doesn't seem to know what the word restitution even means. Unless she's got a magic wand or a time machine, neither she nor anyone else can make restitution for what this country did to us, because it took our ancestors' lives. It took their opportunities from their children and did this to us for generations all the way up to the present. It took people's dignity and their ability to live their lives in peace. It took away what potential those people had to become. You can't restore that. But you can make the bastards pay for it. But she tries to use weasel words. She tries to minimize cash payments, to try to go ahead and diminish the importance of that. She mentions cash payments one time, but breezes by it. She makes it very clear, well, we can't just limit ourselves to thinking about cash payments. Let's think about more important things. And then she goes on to use vague, unspecific gibberish about restitution, but she never says what that's supposed to mean, which of course is the entire point. It doesn't mean anything. It's just supposed to divert us away from talking about money, because that was her job on this task force, to derail and divert the conversation away from reparations as cash payments, and she failed. So now she's spouting nonsense about symbolic forms of reparations. Again, did they offer the Japanese or Native Americans or anyone else symbolic anything? When it comes to reparations, everybody else gets cash. They get money. They get land. Well, black people, on the other hand, well, we need to be, symbols are important. We need to move on to more important symbolic forms of reparations. We need symbols. Symbols is what we need. More symbolic forms. And what's her idea of symbolic reparations? An apology. Well, so much for experts. And of course, as the black media, we've already been telling you for years, an apology isn't reparations at all. And how do we know that? Because one of the white media's favorite bootlicks, Jonathan putting on his cape heart, said so 3 years ago. He said a check could never take the place of a sincere apology. That's somebody who thinks simply way too much of massa. And don't kid yourself about how low down this down low cape heart is. His cowardly and damnable words, those weren't the sentiment of someone who merely felt that cash reparations would never become a reality, so he was asking for the most he thought he could get. This wasn't somebody who was simply mired in defeatism. Capehart opposes reparations of any sort. He has his white media job. He's got his white husband and his white audience, and as far as he's concerned, his job is to keep all of them happy. He thinks that he's part of that society. And cash reparations, why, that would make all of the white media executives at MSNBC or the Washington Post that Capehart shills for, that would make them unhappy. Readers, particularly non-black readers, who would be giving all sorts of vitriol and hatred, he would certainly be ultra-hypersensitive to any criticism or opposition that they throw up. So he wants to go ahead and do that to make sure that they are perfectly pleased with him across the board. And of course, there would be all kinds of awkward pillow talk between him and his white husband. Now, when bottom feeders like Jonathan Capehart and these bootlicking bastards on that task force are whining like this, that lets you know they're terrified of what massa will think. That's how you know we're on the right track. In order to get what we're supposed to get, we're going to have to make this evil white supremacist system do things it wasn't designed to do. That California task force was supposed to either bury the idea of reparations altogether. If they couldn't do that, they were supposed to define reparations as being for everyone. That was supposed to be their job, but the grassroots mobilized and forced them to do things that they weren't supposed to do. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, when you make a demand of white supremacy, you must make sure that it's something requiring them to give up their power. White society has no problem giving us an apology because that doesn't cost them anything. It changes nothing and it means nothing. They can and often do apologize all day and all night. They don't have to sacrifice one iota of power to do that. You look at all the treaties these white supremacists here in the U.S. have signed. With Native Americans, with the Europeans, with our ancestors, hell, with other white Americans. And they've broken practically all of them. So you can keep your apology. We already know what these white supremacist word is worth, and it isn't worth spit. An apology from these white supremacists would be an insult. You want to make the scumbags sorry? You take a chunk out of their behinds, hit them in their wallets. Because that's why they embarked on this whole genocidal white supremacist jihad in the first place. To monopolize the world's resources and the wealth of the world, and to force others to build an empire that they would then take and hand over to their descendants intact. Take that from them, and you've made them sorry. That must be the goal, because anything else is a waste of time, including making feeble excuses about why we shouldn't put any pain on the white supremacists. Now, notice that the excuse-making bootlicks never ask who qualifies as black. Even if we were stupid enough to go along with their reparations for all, then who would that apply to? Can someone who just got to the U.S. last week claim to be a victim of historic racism in the U.S.? What's the cutoff point? See, by clearly defining reparations as being for the descendants of American slaves, you have specified exactly who it applies to. And you have attached it to a historical event. It's quantifiable, it's definable, unambiguous. There's no question that your ancestors and you yourself have been wronged by this country and are owed for it. You can go ahead and tell them exactly what happened. You can tell them how long it's been going on and who did it. And for the white supremacists, that's the problem. So what they need to do is to muddy the waters and to do it fast. Just understand there's not one of their phony lying talking points that would not apply more so if reparations were for all black people, and that's the entire point. They want to have it both ways. We've made the issue clear and inarguable. They need to manufacture some doubts and questions and kick up some white noise so they can derail this thing like they've done with every other attempt at racial justice policy in this country. But as goes California, so goes the nation. So for the grassroots to pressure California's Reparations Task Force to correctly define reparations as specifically being for the descendants of slaves in this country means that potentially the grassroots can define reparations nationwide. They lost the fight to make reparations for everyone. So now they're resorting to a fallback position to try to define what reparations is. That's why this Camilla Moore clown was saying that claptrap, trying to diminish the importance of cash payments as just being one form of reparations. And what we need to focus on is non-cash reparations. How about an apology? Because that's real valuable, isn't it? But she's not alone. Berkeley City, California has claimed that they're starting a so-called initiative to address the legacy of slavery and systematic oppression in the U.S. Apparently, they put some money aside a little bit, just a little. As the white media says, Berkeley town officials believe they have the responsibility to seek reparations for black Californians who are descendants of slaves. Notice how they left the American off. They're trying to see if there's any space where they can find a wedge they can put in there. Is there any room that they can use to try to go ahead and crowbar in and shoehorn in all the effery? They're not talking about cutting any checks, by the way, in Berkeley City. It's just one empty bit of gibberish about an initiative. You can already smell the trick bag being put together. Then they quote a black city councilman named Ben Bartlett, who claims the city's legislation presents a framework to take us beyond reaction and into true repair of the person, the community, and the nation. Now, you can already tell this clown is clearly auditioning for a job in D.C. He's clearly auditioning. That's where this kind of asinine, useless, empty word salad comes from. Barack Obama couldn't have spouted that gibberish any better. This Bartlett guy, he says nothing about our people, nothing about FBA DAS people. And if they're not being specific, that means they're trying to give themselves room for the con game that they really want to run. And this, of course, is no exception. As the story continues, this Bartlett character says Berkeley officials will use allotted funds to hire a consultant who will be well versed in sociological and economic history as well as legislative conceptions. And the hired consultant will provide community members with education on American slavery and the concept of reparations. In addition, the consultant will share recommendations to city council members related to policy. We're talking about money, and they're talking about a government contract for some fool who will give them a black history lesson and make some recommendations. Now, when it came to the Ukrainians, did anyone say, well, we have to have an initiative first, and we have to hire a consultant, someone who can first educate us on the Stalinist purges and Chernobyl and such? No, they just signed legislation saying bring them over here. They didn't say, well, before we can do anything for these Ukrainians, first we have to bring in a consultant who's going to be well versed in Ukrainian sociological and economic history and legislative concepts, and they're going to be giving proposals for the community, for the nation, for the people, for us all. They didn't do that. They just signed legislation saying bring them over here. And Biden just got through saying, yeah, we're going to be giving these guys another $800 million in American aid. That's billions of dollars these guys are getting now. No study necessary. No consultant necessary. No need to educate anyone on Ukrainian history at all. They just handed over the money. The story then goes on to say that Bartlett believes Berkeley's proposal could be the catalyst needed for a national discussion of slavery and the need for reparations. Well, that's the whole problem right there. We've had nothing but discussion about reparations since 1865. Just running around talking in circles, which was the entire point. We've had phony sock puppet organizations and bootlick front groups like N-Cobra who have discussed reparations, and that's all they wanted to do. It wasn't until the new black media got people organized that things started to move. Now they're saying, let's give some white people a consulting contract and let them talk to us about it. If these clowns have their way, the only discussion will be them pretending to care about reparations while telling us all the reasons they can't do it. That's what the goal here is. They failed to define reparations as being for all black people regardless of when they got here, which would have opened the door for every white person who thinks they're slick enough to claim that they had a great-great-grandfather who was black back in the day. Now they're going to Plan B, try to define reparations as being anything other than cash payments. So these are the so-called leftists, by the way, and they always got some black front person out there as their meat puppet. These are your so-called white liberals trying to do this. They're telling the truth when they say that they want this to be a model for the nation as to how to handle reparations. Oh yeah, model all right, for stalling tactics, for wasting our time, for giving money to white interests and then claiming, see, we allocated all this money for reparations and you Negroes are no better off before you were we think the reparations weren't the problem. It's you people. What about all of these white consultants you gave the money to? It doesn't mean no excuses, buddy. You're just giving excuses now. And as you see with this Bartlett clown, there will be a number of Negroes trying to help them pull this con. They're going to be setting up all of this garbage that's going to be going to white banks. Oh, we have a scheme in New Hampshire. A reparations plan. And the idea is going to be to help you put a down payment on a home. When it came to the Homestead Act, you didn't tell these white folks you're going to get a down payment on a home. You just told them you're going to get the house. And when it came to these white GIs coming back from World War II, you didn't tell them there's going to be a little bit of student assistance. You said we're going to pay for your doggone education across the board. Same thing with the Small Business Association. And talking about down payments for a house. And who, by the way, is the down payment going to be going to? Oh, it's going to be going to these white banks over here. So you're not going to put cash in my hands. You're going to instead give me a voucher that can only be used with a white bank or some other government-authorized housing lending institution. For over a decade, we've had a whole bunch of dusty dudes and hood rats and sellouts and bootlicks and other assorted trash who have been telling us that reparations would never be a part of the national discourse. And then we made it a part of the national discourse. Then the bootlicks, losers, potheads, and chickenheads said that it would never become policy. And now California has been forced to bend the knee. Now you have those people, many of them who lurk right here in places like this, who are slowly, in their cases very slowly, because that's as fast as their two-cycle weed whacker brains move, they're coming to the realization that they were wrong, and a lot of them didn't want reparations to ever become a reality because they found or are trying to find a comfortable place under white supremacy. A lot of them, especially out in California, are trying to chase interracial sexual access or intersectionalism, or they're trying to divest themselves from black society. And they're terrified now that what we're doing is going to make things real awkward between them and whatever interracial access they're hoping to get. For a lot of the Negroes who have been attacking and poo-pooing reparations, this was what was driving them to oppose it. They're hoping to be accepted by the dominant society, and for black people to get our due, well, what that means is that plan's going to go up in smoke. Ain't going to be any more of this, hi, Bob, how you doing? No, the dominant society is comforted by seeing black people who are on the bottom because that means that the racial pyramid that put them at the top is alive and well and is still maintained, is still stable. You start talking about we're going to be making sure we crack that artificial foundation of black people at the bottom, all of a sudden you got these people at the top looking and going, that's a problem. A lot of them are working to undermine our efforts. A lot of them have been cheering for us to fail and to lose because we're threatening their hopes to get a pat on the head. Well, we're not weak and we're not cowards. So the Jonathan Capeharts and the Burrows and the rest of the scumbags, they're going to be sitting here giving their empty opposition, their weak denials. But don't be surprised as you see more and more of these white liberals who come forward who are going to be emboldened to take these talking points and go to the next logical step, which is going to be outright opposition, which is, okay, well, you forced us to bend the knee, but God dang it, we're still not doing it. And you're going to be having all of these bootlicks out here who are going to be backing them up across the board, including some of these clowns like In Cobra and others. Expect to see them standing with the very people who they claimed that they were trying to get to go for reparations. Now that there's a threat that it could actually happen, you're going to be seeing these guys all of a sudden trying to lend their voices to watering it down, saying it doesn't have to be cash. Why, it can be anything, especially a fall fish fry or a summer luncheon. Well, we didn't let these scumbags dictate to us who qualifies for reparations, and we certainly won't let them tell us what reparations is. We know that the only experts on reparations are the people who actually want to see it happen. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Hildman Gallo, Bomber 777, William Walton, Sabrina, and Alexandria Victor. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.